Adam. So Jaran Mellerud said energy waste is the biggest problem in the energy industry and that Bitcoin mining fixes this. Walk us through what he means by that.
Well, it's important to say, I think he's right? I think he's correct in saying that. Waste is prevalent in energy production and in power generation, but in energy production, mainly because of the thermodynamic laws of this universe, right? Transporting and utilizing energy is difficult, right? I've said it countless times before that we don't have an energy supply problem on Earth, right? We have an energy utilization and distribution problem, right? This is about getting energy, from supplier to consumer for a cost that's, competitive, or a cost that makes sense, right? In other words, nobody's going to spend, $50 million to build a natural gas pipeline if that pipeline's only going to yield them $20 a day in, natural gas sales. And so really this is about the challenge of utilizing and distributing energy, right? And getting it to a consumer. What's beautiful about Bitcoin is Bitcoin is, for the first time in history, you can sell energy to something other than human beings, right? Nobody's buying the energy when you're mining Bitcoin. It was pre-programmed 13 years ago to reward you for your energy today. That's an astounding fact, right? It's an autonomous energy consumption market, autonomous downstream energy consumption market. And that allows for a lot of flexibility, right? And it's different than every other kind of method of selling energy before, because you always had counterparties, right? You always had a counterparty risk, your buyer. If you were producing energy, you always had some risk that your buyer might leave. Your buyer might no longer want to purchase the energy from you. Bitcoin removes all counterparty risk when it comes to selling energy, and that's an astounding fact, right? That's kind of an earth-rattling innovation. And that's the world we live in today. And so Bitcoin does fix that in many ways. Bitcoin seeks out inefficient production, right? Where production is most inefficient, Bitcoin makes the most sense. There's the biggest opportunity for a Bitcoin arbitrage, right? Because there's the most amount of waste or the most amount of dollar arbitrage, value arbitrage. And so, yeah, Bitcoin's, it's an astounding thing, right? We're sitting here talking about this network that was created by humans. It's maintained by human beings, right? I run a node, you run a node, and it's produced by human beings. But human beings aren't buying the energy. It's a network that's buying the energy. It's a very interesting reality, right? And it's a profound one.
That makes me think of like a corporation, right? It's like corporations are built by people. They have their own processes, standards, rules, and in a way but they take on a life of their own. They have like their own tax ID number, but this is like a decentralized corporation that no one controls in that way. I've never thought of it like the buyer of last resort as an entity though, because I've always associated it with the Bitcoin miners are the ones that are really buying the energy, but it sounds like the network is really what's consuming it.
Yeah, well, I think in the beginning, in the early days, and I'd say that we're still in the early days, right? We're in the first million blocks. It'll seem like the miners are the buyers of last resort. But what happens when the producer becomes the miner? Is he buying his own energy? Right? No, he's selling it to Bitcoin. He's
vertical integration.
Effectively, right? He's exporting energy to the Bitcoin network.
Do you think that the Bitcoin mining industry is trending towards vertical integration?
Of course. It'll go upstream, right? There's this constant force to push miners upstream, right? And what I mean by upstream is toward the energy source.
What is it about of being vertically integrated upstream that is it just make your business more efficient? Or?
Yeah, that's what it is, right? Think about being an oil and gas producer, right? That's where I'm going to be, where I'm going to have probably the best examples, where I'm most literate, if you will. And an oil and gas producer, he has options typically when it comes to selling maybe his oil, right? But oil is such a high demand commodity. You get taxed on the oil the second that you produce it, right? You don't get taxed like because they know it's going to sell, right? You're taxed like immediately upon production. With with oil and gas producers, especially with natural gas, they don't have many options, right? There's typically one pipeline, right? And that's whoever operates that pipeline, whoever built that pipeline, they have to deal with them. And if you think about that, that's called the midstream of oil and gas, right? The pipeline distribution kind of system is the midstream. Midstream oil and gas has had upstream oil and gas, the producers of crude and natural gas. They've had them, kind of by the throat, because think about it. If you have a pipeline in an area where there's a whole bunch of oil and gas producers, right? And
you need my pipeline.
You need what else are you
right.
going to do with your gas, right? You can't truck it to market, right? I mean, you could, but it's not economically feasible. And so, on this planet, we have an incredible supply of energy, right? I mean, I've said it before, between water and wind and the sun in the sky, and then the most important one, in my opinion, is hydrocarbons, coal, oil, and natural gas. We have an incredible abundance of energy. Supply is not the issue. It's about whether or not that primary energy source is economically stranded, right? People talk about geographically stranded. Really, it's economically stranded because we can transport energy, but at what cost? And that's where Bitcoin comes in as this beautiful, it's a savior, right? It rescues this stranded and kind of economically stranded energy source.
So this gives upstream, which is like the drillers, right? Like the people who are getting the oil.
Yeah,
the closest to the source.
Yeah, the operators, the producers.
This gives them more leverage in the game theory, like negotiations in the entire vertical and like an entire supply chain of oil and gas, from production to pipeline to refinement and transportation. Wow.
Well, I mean, that's what I get really excited about, right? Is because there's plenty, especially here in the United States, there's tons of small oil and gas operators.
And they don't need to, they're like, hey, you, Mr. Pipeline guy, you can't call the shots anymore because I don't need your pipeline as badly now because I can monetize it on premise.
Well, at least put it this way. I mean, I think Michael Saylor has said this before, right? Where it's the sheer optionality of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's sheer existence changes the entire upstream oil and gas game, because even if an oil and gas producer doesn't have a Bitcoin mine, when he goes to the table to negotiate with the pipeline, with the midstream, he sits down, and if the midstream doesn't give him, a price for his gas that he likes,
it's a bargaining tool.
Exactly. He can say, well, I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to mine Bitcoin with it, right?
Wow.
And so, that just by sheerly existing, it helps upstream operators in those negotiations, and it helps them, leverage that optionality to their best interest, and it increases efficiency across the board, right? And so, ultimately, what we're going to see is, I think that vertical integration, that force pushing miners upstream, if you will, and I don't even know if it is pushing the miners upstream. I mean, I talk to Bitcoin miners. They're starting to learn about oil and gas, right? Like, I mean, I happen to come from an oil and gas. I was in the oil and gas industry before I found out about Bitcoin. But so many Bitcoiners now, so many Bitcoin miners are becoming, energy production experts, because it makes sense, right? That's the game they're playing. Is really what they're doing is they're exporting or selling energy to the Bitcoin network, to this thing that was programmed by, Satoshi Nakamoto 13 years ago to reward them today for their effort, for their work. Mm-hmm. And, it's probably the most disruptive thing happening on Earth right now, right? I think it's as disruptive as the internet, right? Probably more disruptive than electricity. It's really profound. And so what we'll see is oil and gas producers specifically, but also all energy producers, are going to become fluent at mining Bitcoin. They're going to understand this game as well as I do, as well as anybody. They're not there yet. Some of them are. The ones that are they're miles ahead of their competition. But if I'm an oil and gas producer and I can make more value with the exact same amount of oil and gas than you can, you're toast, right? You're absolutely toast. I can get better deals from the midstream. I can get more dollars per MCF or per barrel of oil. It's just a matter of time before I take you over, right?
It makes sense now why the company is called Upstream Data.
Yeah,
I never connected the dots. If
you're in oil and gas, the dots are pretty easy to connect. And keep in mind too, like Upstream Data, we're an oil and gas company, right? We're not a Bitcoin mining company. Oftentimes, guys will call me and they're like, well, you guys are and I'm like, well, we're a Bitcoin focused company, right? But we build for oil and gas. We build engines, we build enclosures that have nothing to do with Bitcoin. In fact, it's a fair amount of our business. But we focus on, surface power, and anytime that you have stranded hydrocarbons, stranded gas, waste gas, you ought to be mining Bitcoin, right? There's no reason to waste these resources anymore. There's no reason to flare anymore, because we have this, kind of omnipresent market. And it's free of counterparty risk. I mean, that's the thing that just blows my mind, is even if you go to a town and say you want to be a power provider in a town, you start up a utility company. Well, there is a fear. There's a external risk that what happens if everybody in this town decides to get up and leave, right? Like maybe they're there because of some booming industry, and then that industry goes to crap, and they all, the population of the town gets cut in half. That's counterparty risk, right? Your buyer is part of that risk equation. With mining Bitcoin, the market, the network will always give you some amount of Bitcoin for your work, for your energy. And it's very transparent on what it's going to pay you, right? It was actually pre-programmed on what it's going to pay you.
How often is this natural gas flaring done? Is this every single, natural gas, methane, every single spot? Is it's just as common as I don't really understand.
No, yeah, it's prevalent. Flaring is prevalent. What's reported in the United States is a million MCF a day. I think it's 1 billion cubic feet per day.
Is that a lot?
So I'll to put that into perspective, most people don't know this, right? So there are hundreds of thousands of wells in the United States, hundreds of thousands of wells. I think North Dakota has 50,000 alone.
And what does a well vary in how much oil it has?
That all over the place. Yeah, it's all over the place. But when you produce oil, it's very rare that you produce crude oil and you don't have some type of associated natural gas production, right? Whether it's casing gas or literally just gas that builds up in the tanks, the tank batteries. When you're storing the oil, right, inevitably pressure starts to build because gas rises to the surface. There's always typically some natural gas mixed in, with the oil. And so that's where there's just small amounts of, 20,000 cubic feet, 10,000 cubic feet, 50,000 cubic feet all over the place. And, a big majority of what's reported is in Texas, because Texas doesn't really care if you flare all that much. I mean, they're starting to care.
So if you're required to report it, you don't.
Well, exactly.
Because you get fined.
Well, exactly right. And so the reported numbers are they are most definitely, a lowball number. I think real numbers are much bigger. But you talk about 1 million MCF, and you're talking about, 5 gigawatts of power. So that's the whole network right now.
Jeez.
If you were using S19s, I guess. So
right.
It's a lot of energy, right? And so where does that wastefulness come from? Is it because oil and gas producers just hate the planet, and they're just looking to, they're greedy, and they just want to get rich, and they don't care if they destroy the planet in the meantime? No, it's because they know that they can produce crude oil out of this well. There's a massive demand for petroleum, and this is a byproduct, right? And so before Bitcoin, flaring gas wasn't painful. It was normal, right? In the same way that if I, before Bitcoin, if I walked up to a hydroelectric facility, right, and most all hydroelectric facilities have tons of electricity they have nothing to do with, right? And if you learned about one before Bitcoin, and you learned that they were wasting 30% of the electricity that they produced because they didn't have anybody to buy it, they were just running it into the ground or whatever, it was oh, well, that's kind of a bummer, but I guess it leaves room for the community to expand, for the population to grow, and we still have adequate infrastructure to provide them power, right? But it wasn't painful. It was kind of just the laws of physics, and it is what it is. Same thing with flaring, where flaring gas was just part of producing oil. Now, with Bitcoin, it's painful. There's actually a dollar amount attached to that. There's an opportunity cost where oil and gas producers lay in bed at night and they look at the numbers and they see they're flaring, say 1,000 MCF a day between all their wells. Well, I could tell them right now that with new Gen ASICs, they're maybe making $8 per MCF. So they're burning $8,000 a day, right? I mean, that hurts, right? That's painful. And that pain, I think, is what gets individuals, human beings, to behave differently. Right?
Yes.
They wake up the next day, and now they start paying attention to this pain, and they try to go alleviate that pain. Because if their competitors are alleviating that pain, they're in trouble. And so this is a carrot to make the whole industry. Honestly, they're going to be more stewardly of their resources. They're going to waste less because it's painful now to waste gas. Whereas before, there's nothing else to do with it. I mean, and trust me, guys had tried, right? Guys had tried to come up with ways of storing natural gas in these like deep earth salt mines and then under immense amounts of pressure. But then you run the economics of it, and they're terrible, right? They're not good. The problem of stranded gas has just been one that was accepted in the oil and gas industry, and then Bitcoin came around.
When did people start like keying in on this? Like, because it wasn't before ASICs, right? Like,
no,
it wasn't in the early days because it didn't consume enough electricity and power, right?
Well, no, I don't know if it was about electricity and power. I think the economics of it, that's a part of it. I think that's a good point. But I think what was more telling of why it took until it did. Which, by the way, I think that was around 2016. I truly think Steve Barber was the first one in the oil field mining Bitcoin.
Which is the CEO.
Yeah, he's the founder of Upstream Data. He's my boss. He was out there in 2016 putting this together because he was, petroleum engineer. But before that, it wasn't. I'll put it this way: the decade of and certainly the first 5 years of mining Bitcoin, your energy cost didn't matter. It was irrelevant, right? What mattered was
having a hash race.
It was a hardware race. It was about having the latest and greatest chips, because every new addition of a GPU or a ASIC or a chip was 1,000 times jump in efficiency. And so where we're at today, and I've said this before, is the first decade of mining Bitcoin is about maximizing the efficiency of the hardware. It was a hardware race. This decade and beyond, it's all about sourcing the cheapest, most economic energy on the margin.
And it will be that way going forward.
And that's because this. Right? So say, the newer ASICs are out, the S19 X Pros.
It's a diminishing returns of the increase in efficiency, right?
Right. And so, the S19 Pro or whatever, it's at 29.5 watt per terahash, right? Now, the lower this number, the better. The less watts you use per terahash, the better. So S19 Pro's at 29.5 watt per terahash. This X Pro comes out, and I think they're advertising like 24 maybe. So what is that? That's like a 15 to 20% increase in efficiency. Well, guess what? My energy might be 15 or 20% cheaper than yours. So I don't care that you have X Pros and I've got Pros, because I've got energy that's 50% cheaper than you. So actually, I'm still beating you, and you upgraded. And so this now becomes a game of marginal energy production. And where is there the most deadweight loss? Where is there the most inefficiencies? That's where Bitcoin's going to show up. And there's tons of inefficiencies on upstream oil and gas, tons of natural gas waste.
Because they had like this, it makes me think of what you're saying about the midstream sort of negotiation and the power that the pipelines had. There's a sort of inefficiency and uncaptured value that was sitting there because they didn't have the bargaining chips to play, I think.
Yeah, they have no other option, right? When you have no options.
And now that they have them, they can like operate much more lean and really operate multiple streams of revenue, where something was like it was just a waste, and now it's an additional revenue stream.
There's a market for it. Because that's the thing. Before Bitcoin, right, you look at the world, what was the total energy demand of the world? It was the total energy demand of human beings, right? Well, now, today, we have the total energy demand of human beings, and we have the Bitcoin network, right? It's like this extra energy demand market, this autonomous energy consumption market. And so because of that, we have excess demand, right? There's excess energy demand. There's always something demanding your energy. It's called the Bitcoin network. Because we have excess demand, we can justify excess production. And excess energy production is what will lower marginal costs, it will increase efficiency, and allow us to go out and monetize really primary energy sources that made absolute no economic sense before the advent of Bitcoin.
The side that like intrigues me is, I mean, I think we got to like be responsible and cover this, is like all of this is true if you assume that Bitcoin still exists, that it still commands hash rate. What is your what do you think is the sort of perpetual motion or the Sterling engine of Bitcoin that keeps it going so that it ensures that it does provide economic value to those who tap these, geographically separated resources? Because that's like the one thing I wonder. It's like, yeah, like cool, I got all, it doesn't matter how many Bitcoin I got if no one else demands it. I'm sure there's something about its like nature of like why people are gonna adopt it, that then it's like a game theory thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you think it is about Bitcoin that okay, maybe not ensures, but gives let's say like an ExxonMobil or something, largest energy producer in the world, like what gives them the confidence to develop this type of like capex? Let's just like throw all this up front to mine Bitcoin, with the confidence that they know it's going to continue, the network's going to continue to be there. People, the block rewards are going to be worth some, what they need.
That's a great question. I mean,
it was a long one, so sorry.
No, it's a complicated one. But I think, effectively, what's the value proposition of Bitcoin, right? In my opinion, it's the only ledger of truth.
Like how do you explain it to these oil and gas people so that they're like, okay, I'll do this. Like this, I see the future in this.
What I say to them is similar to kind of what I'm saying to you, but it's more along the lines of, listen, if this thing is what I think it is, if this thing hangs around, right? If it's not gonna just go bust and go to zero or something in the next couple of years, if it is what I think it is, if it is a new standard of accounting, right? What is money, right? Money is a technology that we use to organize. Humans use money to organize, and that's how we track value. That's how we track proofs of work, right? Is through money. And so the better the money, the more accurate that measurement of value is, right? It's like having a true north. That's why I think gold operated as a good money for a long time. Well, that alone is reason enough to at least, I guess, flirt with the idea that Bitcoin's going to hang around. And if it's going to hang around, as an energy producer, somebody who it's your livelihood to produce, oil and natural gas, ought you not have a fluent understanding of this new autonomous energy consumption market, this way in which to sell energy over the internet to nobody, right? And having no counterparty risk when you're selling that energy. If this thing hangs around, ought you have a fluent enough understanding of it to at least intelligently tell me why you're not participating, right? I mean, if you're just going to throw your hands up and say like, no, it's, magic internet money, I don't understand it, and that's why I don't want to participate in it, I don't think you're going to be a very good oil and gas producer this decade, right? You might survive, but in a long enough time horizon, you won't survive, because those who do adopt it, those who do at least get a good enough understanding of it as to why they're not participating with it, and that's part of it, right? Maybe it makes sense over here, but it doesn't make sense over here. They're just going to be better producers. They're going to be better producers of energy because they have optionality, right? You're over here stuck in this world where you can only sell your hydrocarbons to human beings, and you're battling against somebody who can sell it to the same human beings, or they can sell it to this autonomous network, right? So they have optionality, you don't, right? They have leverage, you don't. At the end of the day, this is empowering to energy producers. This really gives energy producers, I'd say like a kick in their step. I've seen it with oil and gas production, where the oil and gas industry has been vilified and kicked in the teeth for the last 2-3 decades. All of a sudden, they're starting to get a little bit more confident, right? More excited about what they do because there's new opportunity, right? There's a competitive advantage that they can gain by understanding this new market, this new downstream market where they can sell energy. And so, a lot of the guys are getting excited, right? They get excited about that edge they can get over the competition. And this decade's going to be defined by oil and gas producers figuring out at what scale, at what time frame, in what locations do we implement Bitcoin into our upstream oil and gas production portfolio, right?
So whereas if the last 2 decades or so, America's petroleum industry was defined by horizontal drilling, I would say, or I'm assuming that you would say that the hot new trend in American petroleum industry for these considerable amount of time going forward is going to be, where do you squeeze out the margin and implement Bitcoin mining into your upstream process?
Yeah, and at what scale, and using what suppliers, using what infrastructure,
and what strategy? Like, do you then sell it immediately? Do you hodl it? Like, this reminds me of like the Bitcoin mining companies that we have today. That you see like companies like Hut 8, and like they just are hodling their whole stash and diluting their shareholders to hodl, and then you see other companies like Coors that are just literally mining it and immediately selling it.
Yeah, and they're a dollar game. I mean, and that's what's fun too, is right. Everyone's learning at the same time. This is so new, right? We're just thinking about the profound impact of an autonomous, global autonomous energy consumption market, a place where anywhere on earth you can just sell energy. I mean, when I say no counterparty risk, it's also an immutable way to sell energy. That's the other thing too, is that there's regulation around selling energy. Like if I want to go produce crude oil and sell it, there's a lot of regulation around that. There's a lot of, oversight to it. And there's those who can stop me from selling it. With Bitcoin, I literally don't have to talk to anybody, right? I could like rig up a system in my garage where I pedal a bicycle. It charges a battery, and I use that battery to power an ASIC. And literally, I just took my own sweat and energy and I sold it, and I got money for it. And nobody can tell me that I can't, right? Nobody can stop me. I mean, a 15-year-old kid can wake up and sell $1 million of energy today, and he doesn't have to pick up the phone. He doesn't have to ask anyone's permission. He doesn't have to be a certain age or be a certain person. This is truly a free market, a free energy market. That's where it gets kind of exciting, right?
And it's a borderless one too, right? Because you could be selling to someone in a hostile jurisdiction and not even know it in a way.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's because you're not really selling to them,
right?
Because you're
selling
not
it to the network.
It's the network. Right? There's no buyer. I mean, I use Bitcoin all the time. I'm not buying energy. I'm using Bitcoin.
Well, let me put it this way. You can be interacting in trade with a counterparty that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to.
Absolutely. And really, at the end of the day,
makes it more efficient.
I mean, Bitcoin is the only money, the only commodity that you can trade. You can trade kilowatt hours for immutably, right? If I want to trade kilowatt hours for dollars, I'm going to have a counterparty risk. Right? I'm going to have counterparty risk. And by the way, even when I can mine Bitcoin. If I want to then convert that Bitcoin into dollars, I typically have counterparty risk, right? So Bitcoin is the only commodity that you can produce free of counterparty risk.
This whole idea of counterparty risk is completely, it's like the iceberg under the surface. Like people just completely, they don't think about it because you have counterparty risk in basically every facet of everything. Like I rent from a person. Like there's a counterparty there, you know?
No, I mean But
his rent. I'm a counterparty to him.
Absolutely.
If I decided not, it's so pervasive in everything, and this is getting people clued in to the idea that you can remove counterparty risk is a profound thought just in its own.
Money there should be no counterparty risk to your money.
That's why gold was so good, right? Because no one could create it.
Exactly, because you couldn't just create it create it at no cost, right? You couldn't be an alchemist. And so, but that's exactly why Bitcoin is the best money, right? Sometimes people talk about money as if it's its own thing. Money is always a commodity, right? It hasn't been really for the last 50 years since we've been on this dollar, paper dollar standard, this fiat, it's money by decree. But for all of history, money is a commodity. And Bitcoin is the best commodity, or the commodity best suited to become money, because it truly has zero counterparty risk. I mean, you can hold Bitcoin, much like with gold buried in the backyard or something. Nobody can just dilute you, right? Nobody can freeze it. Nobody can make it yours worthless while somebody else's is okay. Having money or a commodity that's free of counterparty risk, free of just some type of bastardized and inflationary measures, that's going to be the commodity best suited to be money. And it has the fairest production. I mean, I've said this before. I always like to ask people, try to pretend you're in a world where Bitcoin, was never created, and somebody comes to you and they task you with the hurdle of, I want you to create a money that's fair, And I want you to just create a fair money. And I think what most people would do, I think where my brain would immediately go, is I would think about creating something and then distributing it equally to the world, right? Like everybody gets 1 million units of this money, right? No matter, who you are, what you've done, everyone gets 1 million units. And then at that point on, money will consolidate and go into the hands of those who create, value and things like that. And that's the fairest kind of form I can think of. Satoshi Nakamoto didn't do any of that. He figured out how to make a commodity that can be truly fairly produced, right?
Bootstrap
it's fair
itself.
production. I mean, fair production the word fair is tough, right? It's like, it assumes some type of, equity across the table, which in the real world doesn't exist, right? Somebody's always got a little bit better than others. But when it comes to Bitcoin, truly, nobody can produce Bitcoin cheaper than anyone else because of who they are, right? Because of some unfair advantage, right? Where right now, those closest to the money printer, I mean, some guys in suits literally just log into a computer, they add zeros to the money supply, and then they, divert those funds to go help the economy by going and buying these stocks and getting these people rich. And that's unfair money production, right? That's about as unfair as it gets. Bitcoin's the antithesis of that, where, a quadriplegic, a quadriplegic
He's going to be a quadriplegic pretty soon.
That guy was flying. A quadriplegic has, can be just as good at mining Bitcoin as anybody else, right? Like literally, you don't even need to be able-bodied to mine Bitcoin. That's profound, right? And it has the lowest barrier to entry. I mean, even mining gold. What's the bare minimum capex to go mine gold? I mean, I guess I could go up into the mountains here in Colorado and I could pan for gold or whatever, right? But on a realistic, plane, there's a capex barrier. Again, there's a massive regulatory and infrastructure barrier. You got to get access to the land. Bitcoin, none of that. All you need is an internet connection and a microchip or a computer chip, right. Which, both of those things have been pretty well commoditized and available.
It's such a rabbit hole.
It's mind-blowing. It gets me very bullish, right, to think about this, because I don't think we will ever realize how early it is. The first 1 million blocks of Bitcoin is, people were going to write stories about the first 1 million blocks, right? They're going to write books about it. And there's going to be people that, stay up in bed at night just frustrated that they weren't alive during this time. And we were, right? And that's a reason I mine Bitcoin.
Wow, dude. What perspective that brings, because this year has been extremely challenging for miners. The difficulty has skyrocketed. We're due for another 4% upward adjustment now. We're at block 600 and we're at 760.10.
I was gonna say we're over 750 at this point. Yeah,
I think we started recording at block 760,000.
We're in the last quarter of the first 1 million blocks.
Yeah,
right. We're in the last 250,000.
This year has been so challenging for miners, where the prices collapsed and the dude, these people out here, Denver gangs,
the
bro.
Denver street racers,
they're crazy on the street. But yeah, the price has collapsed and the hash rate has mooned. That was the real number go up. And here you are saying that kids in the future are going to be wishing they were alive right now. I'm just dude, I've been waking up with a huge headache every morning looking at Bitcoin mining. So, but I completely understand what you're saying, because this is truly a defining, the most people are going to look back. If Bitcoin, if it turns out like we think it will, this is the founding fathers type of era where it's the history books are being written about right now. So that's you asked me when you came over before we started recording why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you're going to be in the history books about Bitcoin and energy use, and so will Value Stack podcast. And so,
well, yeah, but keep in mind, I'm not going to be in the history books because of any amazingness about me, right?
Disappear.
Bitcoin will thrive.
I don't know,
of no consequence of me. I'm of no consequence on the network.
Bitcoin
right?
will thrive with or without you.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
But humanity's adoption of Bitcoin may be accelerated due to your work and you spreading insight.
That's a great thought. I'd love to Yeah, I'd love it if that's the case, right? I think.
Oh, it is the case.
I mean, I'm just compelled, right? I'm compelled to. I love competition, right? I love fair competition, right? There's nothing worse than, and I think those who have played sports in any competitive nature will sympathize with this, but there's nothing worse than like watching or even worse, participating in some type of competitive sport event, and then you find out later that like someone was cheating, right? Like somebody was gaining an unfair advantage. Right?
How relevant with the chess stuff.
Oh, the chess stuff, or
Who
how about
knew chess was so spicy, bro?
apparently it's really spicy, right? But like even the Houston Astros like banging on trash cans to give the batter, tell him what the catcher was calling. That unfair advantage that taints true competition it's so vile, it's so awful, and it takes away everything, right? It takes away the championship, it takes away the trophy, it makes it all like, wow, I don't even know if I want to play this game anymore, right? That's why I love Bitcoin so much. That's why I had to come
in Bitcoin mining.
That's why I had to be a miner, right? I mean, this is the first time in the history of humanity that any average Joe can participate in the production of money fairly, right? And I know that nobody else is out there getting some kind of unfair advantage. I'm not getting gamed.
Right.
I had to participate in that, right? Like I would kick myself if I didn't become a participant in that game, because I can. Just because for the first time in history, I can participate.
It doesn't show preference towards the largest miners versus you plugging in a single amp miner at your home in your basement. No. And that is crazy.
But still, everyone still fights for a competitive advantage, and everyone's still trying to push.
Well, I think that's a good segue. So what are the things, like if you're considering mining at home, like how is that, like, because you mine at home, I imagine, or we won't dox what you do at home, but but you obviously work with like Bitcoin mining on a much larger scale. Like how is the planning and different, and how does like a company or a mining operation think about it differently than a individual who might be just doing it as a hobby or for a sovereignty aspect? They're not thinking about it.
Well, that's an important distinction, right? So I think this ties in with competitive advantage, because the larger businesses, what they do is, and what they spend their time on is selling a story about how they're going to have a competitive advantage over other miners, right? And maybe it's because they're going to go out into the oil field and they're going to find, waste gas or stranded gas fields, and they're going to make these, deals with those who have the mineral rights, and they're going to be better positioned for hard times. They're going to be better positioned for, like today, a 6.9 cent hash price. Really where they gain advantage though is from the fiat system. It's from getting free money.
Because they can take out debt.
Because debt. Right, because
they can exceptionally low rates.
They can raise debt, and then they can raise more debt to cover their previous debt, and so on. And they can kick that can down the road.
Or they can issue equity.
Or they can issue equity and then dilute the heck out of everybody, right? And so
story of my life.
But that's the fiat. That's not Bitcoin allowing that, right? That's a product of this fiat system that allows that. The individual, though, there's always trade-offs. What's cool about Bitcoin is there's always counterbalancing mechanisms. There's, when price goes way up, massive opportunity for everybody else to bring Hashrate on. If anybody turns their computers off, like it's more opportunity for people to fill in that gap. And so it's an incredibly well-designed system. But even zooming out to the participants, those who are the big, miners, they have financing that they've got to cover, right? I mean, we're seeing that today. We're seeing massive debt raisers.
Marathon is having so much trouble because
everyone's having trouble.
Wait, actually, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about vertical integration. So Marathon has tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of miners, but they don't control their own destiny because they are relying on hosting facilities like Compute North,
Counterparty risk,
and they went bankrupt. And now they're having all this issue where they got the machines, can't plug them in. It's like not your hosting, not your hash rate, right?
Well, and they have what was it, like $500 million of liabilities?
Well, and that's right, because they bought all these machines with debt, thinking that they would have them all plugged in and mining and paying back their liabilities now. But now they're like, okay, we paid for all these machines, we got all these loans we got to come up with, but we can't plug the damn things in because we don't have a place to plug them into.
Wow, and there's financing there, right? And their back is up against the wall, right? They have a fire underneath them where they've got to, on the first of the month, they've got to make a payment of some sort. the individual miner like myself, people home mining, what I would call, I'm gonna call them guerrilla miners, right? Like guerrilla warfare kind of, right? So these guerrilla miners, the small, scrappy, smaller than half a megawatt even, right? So smaller than less than 100 new gen ASICs. They have some awesome advantages, right? They don't get to go and borrow, stupid amounts of money and get kind of crazy financing deals and then refinance, and they don't get that. But what they do get is, one, flexibility, right? Typically their operation is not even big enough that it's really not that big of a pain to move it. Like literally they could like pick up and move their whole operation somewhere else and it wouldn't take that much time, wouldn't cost that much. They could also just like turn their computers off and wait until the market's a little bit better, right? Because they don't have that payment on the first that they have to make. So they're more flexible, right? This hardware might even be more long lasting for them because, hey, when hash price is below 10 cents, I'm going to just flick them off unless it's maybe winter where I'm going to reuse the heat for my house. And then, I'm kind of subsidizing my own heat costs that I was going to take on anyway. But then they also have this float, right? Something I've thought about on a personal perspective is it's a cool thing as a home miner is, I'm mining Bitcoin today and I'm earning that Bitcoin today. And I even take custody of it today. It's, deposited into my sole custody. Nobody else has their hands on it. I don't have to pay my power bill for like 30 days after it's due. So I got like a 60-day float on that Bitcoin. That's actually pretty great, right? That's not nothing, right? So the Bitcoin I mine today, like my power bill comes at the end of the month and they tell you got to pay within 30 days. So I got to pay by the start of the next month. And so like I've got a float, which is pretty nice, honestly. But beyond that, they're flexible. And I think there's a lower time preference, right? So I think I have a lower time preference than these bigger guys. I mean, I know I do because their time preference is the end of the month is when they have to make their payment. Right. Where I'm sitting here, the way I look at it is, I always want to have a nominal amount of hash rate because I don't want anybody to be able to take away my ability to store the fruits of my labor in Bitcoin because I think that could be coming, right? I think where if you no longer can withdraw from an exchange, what does the price of a Bitcoin miner do? I think it goes up, right? Because a Bitcoin ASIC, an exchange is a thing where you can put your dollars into this exchange, and with counterparty risk and with other actors, you then can put dollars in and get Bitcoin out. An ASIC is a thing you put electricity in and you get Bitcoin out. And this is much more immutable, much more permissionless. I want that. I don't want anybody able to be able to cut me away from being able to purchase Bitcoin, if you will, via my electricity. And even if it's at a loss.
Do you really, how realistic, do you really think that's coming?
Yes. I mean, we sit in a world today where
people aren't going to be able to withdraw to self-custody. I mean, I guess you can't, or you already can't in Europe or some countries there.
So I said this, I was on the Simply Bitcoin TV podcast with Nico.
Shout out to Nico.
Awesome
and
guys.
Opti.
Love those guys. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road is if you want to participate in Bitcoin, be prepared to be vilified.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to be vilified. I mean, look at the oil and gas industry. The cool thing is oil and gas industry.
They're already vilified. They're used to it.
Yeah, they're used to it. This is nothing to them. I mean, they've been villains for so long that I'm sure, they're used to that. In fact, they've even capitulated. You see it out there where many of these really big oil and gas companies, they're out there they're raising $100 million to go do an offshore wind project. Like, why would I ever own a stock in an oil and gas company that's building wind? Like, that's moronic to me, right? I by the way, I never will. But at the end of the day, there's this climate extremism out there, right? And I call it extremism. I think it's borderline a religion, right? To where we're at the point where people think that they should be able to take your money and tell you how to live in order to change the weather, right? And I equate that to ancient civilizations that would sacrifice human beings to try to change the weather, right? Like I personally don't believe that the governments of the world, the 215 sovereign nations of the world, I don't think that they can. I don't think they know what a perfect atmospheric composition is of the planet. I certainly don't think that they can achieve it through taxation and legislation, because they can't achieve anything through taxation and legislation. They're very inefficient and very. They're really bad at solving problems, really great at creating them. And so, I tend to I tend to sit in this perspective where I know it's coming. I was tweeting about it in 2018, 2019. I was saying people are going to call us murderers, right? They are. They're going to say that Bitcoin miners are, have a overweighted impact on the climate via either carbon dioxide or whatever, which exacerbates these weather events, which predominantly impact poor communities of color. So we're racist, and we're the reason all these people are dying in a hurricane. Like, they're going to blame us, right? And so I know that that's coming because it's a massive industry in of itself, right? It's over $1 trillion a year. The green, save the planet, carbon sequestration industry, and so I know that we're going to be vilified. Proof of work is going to be vilified. It's already happening in Europe, right?
That's why ETH switched to proof of stake, dude.
Well, they had no option to. Right? I mean, if they didn't, because they were capturable.
Their whole narrative was built on that for the last couple of years.
Right. I mean, they could be captured even while they were a proof of work mechanism, right? It was easy to capture ETH. So they had to go to proof of stake. They had to go play nice with governments. Bitcoin doesn't. Bitcoin, they can make it all illegal. It doesn't stop the network.
I think that the CBDCs are going to be on Ethereum.
Of course they will.
I think it's literally going to be freedom money versus state money. Pick your side. Like,
it already is freedom money versus state money. It's just not an ERC20 token yet.
Right. Well, but I guess the devil's in the details, because it's like, to the unsuspecting normie, they're like, well, I use crypto. And it's like,
yeah. No, I was playing golf the other day with a friend, and he was asking me, he's like, what do you, how you doing? You still working with that oil and gas company, blah, blah. And I was talking to him like, yeah. And the word Bitcoin had come up, and this guy that was like, we were on the driving range. This guy was like, two mats back. He's like, yeah, man, I got some crypto and stuff too. I was like, no, I don't have crypto. I hold Bitcoin, right? Like,
thank you for correcting.
Yeah. Bitcoin is a mechanism to remove counterparty risk from money.
Right. And that's without the counterparty risk, without that removal, it loses most of its appeal.
Almost all of it, right? Yeah. I might as well hold, dollars. I might as well hold, I might as well use lumber as like my money, right?
I'm reading this book here, Money by Jacob Goldstein. It's not a Bitcoin book. I think the end is about Bitcoin, but it's funny. It's a funny money book.
Yeah,
which is unusual. Books about money aren't funny.
Usually pretty nerdy,
pretty boring.
Yeah, objective and analytical.
Yeah, but he talks about like how people would like get backaches from like all the like strings with brass and iron on them, and just like the evolution of money. Like, it's the subtext is called "The True Story of a Made Up Thing," and
a true story.
And that's the thing. Bitcoin is made up. It was made up in the mind of not just Satoshi, but all of the people before him that created, their breakthroughs, whether it's Adam Back or like there's so many, but like Wei Dai, just to name a few. But like it's this whole idea of what is money. It's a true story of a made up thing we're all figuring out in real time, and I think that's like a lot of what you've been describing around the oil and gas industry is like these people who work in and who are experts in their field are being hit with this sort of realization, the orange pill, that's like, huh.
Well, language is a made up thing.
Yeah.
Literally, language is where we're making, like my brain is moving muscles in my mouth, making these sounds.
And then incepting thoughts.
But I'm passing thoughts from my brain to yours via this thing we call language. Right. And money is very analogous to language, right? In the sense that it's
speech in a way, right? Well, code is speech and Bitcoin is code.
But even a step back, right? Even beyond speech, like language, right? Having everybody understand a structure, a system of language, so that when I say a word to you, like it means the same thing as when I say it to him, right? And money it's the language of value, right? And like I was saying before, is thank God that Satoshi Nakamoto, Adam Back, and all those before him, like thank God they were actually instilled with some altruism, because of course, like creating a new money, there's this human incentive, right? This greed incentive, if you will, to give yourself the unfair advantage of production, right? But these guys were all getting together trying to, because they were so disgusted with how unfair the money game was, they wanted to make a system that even they couldn't produce Bitcoin at, an unfair advantage over anybody else. Like that's an altruistic feeling, right? That's an altruistic thought, altruistic creation. It's really for the benefit of the whole. And even to the point where, Satoshi locked in those coins on those first blocks where they can't be spent. And then even weirder, he never moved any of his, which is just
the Genesis
beyond.
block thing. I think that was like an oversight, but the not moving the million or whatever coins is definitely odd.
But it's an acceptable oversight because it's an oversight that doesn't give it. If anything, it makes it fairer, not less fair, right? If it made it less fair, that would be an unacceptable oversight. It would be a problem, right? But in the same way that like losing Bitcoin isn't
donation,
it's not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, it's bad for the person that does it.
I tell people, so like, working at Casa, like we talk about like self-custody and like long-term, low time preference hodling, right? And people, like somebody said, I don't want to lose my coins. And they were like, my grandkids will be rolling over in their grave. I was like, well, my grandkids will be happy. Like they'll be thanking you. And it's
exactly.
It is true. Like that's how you donate to the world. You want to donate in an equitable way, just burn Bitcoin.
Well, and I love how people try to use that as FUD. The funniest, obviously, is Celsius, right? What's his name? Alex Mashinsky coming out and trying to say, like, how dangerous it is to have self-custody because, you could lose your coins. Meanwhile, everyone that deposited with them lost their coins. And meanwhile, he was moving millions of dollars of coins out of Celsius to himself.
Did you see that Core Scientific is like having some issues? Like they might like on Friday, they came out and said that Celsius was like one of their large customers in their hosting facility and they have millions and millions of dollars that owe them. Dude, they were saying there could be material risks to their business. I was like, the largest miner in America.
That's the downside of the
play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Exactly, right? That's where the large not even just miners of Bitcoin, but the large players in this space, again, they keep trying. In the fiat world, you can get unfair advantages.
Get greedy.
But you can earn unfair advantages in the fiat world, truly, right? Like you can get certain patents on your drug, and then nobody else can produce it for 10 years. You can get you can buy these legislators, and so that when they pass the law, only your solar panels are green solar panels and everyone else, you know what I mean? So like there's truly ways to get unfair advantages, and that's when people get real rich, right? They get stupid successful. With Bitcoin, you have to change your thinking. You have to literally stop trying to get an unfair advantage, because what you're going to do is it's going to only come at counterparty risk, right? Counterparty risk is going to come along with any advantage you try to gain, where it's like, oh yeah, everyone else is mining Bitcoin, but I'm mining Bitcoin into a BlockFi account, and then I'm earning 3% on it, and it's like, well, but you're taking counterparty risk, so is that really an advantage, right? It's a trade-off. I don't know if it's an advantage. Bitcoin is not a system for those who want to cut corners, right?
That's the truth,
right? That's what's so beautiful about it is it brings us back to a industry competition that's true.
It's almost like it's like a public good in a way to me, like where there is no way to like
most definitely is a public good,
privatize or concentrate the wealth that Bitcoin, the value that the Bitcoin network creates for humanity. There's really not a way to like consistently over time concentrate that wealth in your corner.
No,
because especially in mining, because it's like it's the worst. I mean, dude, sign me like, okay, hey, I got this business idea, Adam. It's the most ruthlessly competitive industry. It's got very high input costs that in an inflationary environment are going up more, but we talked about why that, vertical integration, get your own energy. But by the way, so we've got a very hyper competitive industry that gets even more competitive over time. And then, by the way, there's a ticking time bomb every 4 years. Like, sign me up, dude. Like,
well, sign me up, because my options are either I know that this game is fair.
Right.
This one's not.
It's what's so interesting, because it's like, okay, well, I think you have to get to the point where you have to like throw your hands up and say, this is what is going to be the world in the future. There is no more, no, the world is not like it used to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Shit, I should have the clip, but no, like I think like there's a reluctance to want to do that, because you're like, no, it's way easier if I can cheat. But
always.
But once people kind of throw their hands up and say, well, everybody else is like gonna do this because no one has an unfair advantage, and so I'm not gonna be able to have an unfair advantage either. So I might as well cooperate. And if I cooperate, everybody cooperates. That's the sort of cyclicality that earlier, well, where it keep like once it has been around for a few years, Lindy effect, right? It's just gonna keep being around.
Well, I mean, I don't even know about the Lindy effect, true, but like I think, this is happening simultaneously with the information age. Right? We got to remember we're very early into the consumer internet. Really, the internet in a pocket has only been around, 15, 20 years, 15, 18 years.
We're going to look back and cringe on the fact that private companies had the sort of data that they have about us, when in the future it'll be like a similar model, but I think it'll be like you own all of that encryption data in a like you own
I hope so.
like the like I got this like Fitbit, right? Like it tracks my heart rate. Like no one should be able to access that data except for my encryption key, right?
Or it should be like you should host your own hardware, right? You should have your own data should be hosted.
But this like
in your own
compromise of self-custody of things and convenience has been like at ends with one another for so long until Bitcoin really like.
Well, but people won't. I think people are going to demand Bitcoin because they get only after they feel the pain of the other system, right?
Charlie and I talked about that, or actually, no, Rob and I talked about that. It's like people don't change until they have to.
Until it's painful.
And when they do, they change quick and they change drastically.
Like I said with oil and gas, right? It was never painful to go to bed at night flaring thousands of cubic feet of gas. It's painful now, right? It's measurably painful. When it comes to money, I think as people become more enlightened to how much of a facade this money system is, right? I mean, it's truly money by decree, and it's starting to happen, right? Because things are starting to break out there in the world. By the way, it boils down to energy, right? Because you can't print, BTUs, you can't print crude oil, you can't print natural gas. So people are starting to become kind of more enlightened to how much of a facade this is. That this money that we all are supposed to spend our lives working for, there's people out there that can produce it in a nanosecond for no cost. They can just will it into existence. That's a really, God, that's a naked feeling when you realize that, right? I mean, ignorance is freaking bliss out there, right? I almost wish I didn't understand how much of a charade this money game was. That's when I think they begin to demand something that can't be rigged, right? Now, that's why I think Bitcoin resonates so well with those in third world countries where currency has already been weaponized against them
because they've seen the need for it.
Well, they've already felt the pain, right? They've been robbed via inflation, right? I mean, talk to anybody from Argentina or Chile, right? Like they've already seen that pain, they've already experienced it, and to know that there's this thing, Bitcoin, that like nobody could do that, like it's not even an option.
It's like the counterparty risk too. Like it doesn't matter until it does.
Exactly.
And then it matters. It's the only thing.
It's the only thing that matters.
Think about in 2008, if you've watched The Big Short.
Of course.
I forget the parties that were all involved, but like one of the big parties had a huge credit default swap from another party, which would have been profitable. It was hugely profitable. But it was so profitable that their party that they bought it from went bankrupt, so they couldn't pay them out the profit. So even though they were right, they didn't get, or they were like weren't going to get anything. But the government said, "Here, we'll step in and bail out."
In other words, true.
It only matters.
Good decision making doesn't get rewarded, right? The only thing that gets rewarded is that kind of scheming decision making.
Dude, I think about this with KYC. Like it's like people like. I mean, look, I buy Bitcoin through Strike and stuff. Like, but I wonder, like, is there going to be a time in the future where I'm like, shit, like all of a sudden the need for having, it's in self-custody, whatever. Like that's, but dang, like, is it just going to be all of a sudden the value of this is going to become very realized in my mind? Whereas today I'm like, well,
let's talk about how Bitcoin could not succeed, because I don't think there's very many ways that Bitcoin, there's a lot of ways they could try to, governments, anyone could try to attack Bitcoin. People love to talk about 51% attacks, by the way. I think it's hilarious.
The more hash rate goes up, the better.
Well, yeah, and like the white paper prepares for a 51% attack. Like it's a very foreseeable potential. It's designed in a way that makes it, exponentially more costly every block you try to keep going. Plus, it's very low incentive. Like there's not much reward. And at the end of the day, it doesn't break the network, right? Like you wait for more confirmations. It doesn't stop Bitcoin. I'll put it that way. And I think we're at way too far of mass at this point, right? Like I said, you'd need to be
the snowball's big at this point.
Yeah, you'd need to be producing over 6 gigawatts of power continuously.
Plus acquire the ASICs. Like,
I think the hardware's out there. I think that, ASICs are quite abundant these days, and they're a lot longer lasting, right? Like, I think it's pretty, like, that's a little more trivial. But at the end of the day, the real attack on Bitcoin is much more of a social political attack. And I think, and what scares me, and I don't mean to jump ahead or anything, but like what scares me is those who are already participating mining Bitcoin in a way that's, they're already kind of in bed with regulators. Really large miners are a great example, right? Those who, and mining pools are miners, but specifically the United States.
Easy points of failure, or large capture points.
Exactly. And when the fight against proof of work really comes out, again, keep in mind, like that proof of work, there's nothing bad about proof of work unless you subscribe to this idea that energy consumption is a bad thing, right? That energy consumption changes. Many people do. I mean, look at the person that like, they're throwing paint on.
Just stop oil. Oh my God.
They're throwing soup on Van Gogh paintings and super gluing themselves to the wall. Like that's not a rational human being in my mind, right? I mean, I said this before, I own a bunch of guns, not because I'm afraid that somebody's going to come try to take my Bitcoin. I'm afraid that there's going to be people that come try to shut me up about this whole climate alarmism thing, right? Like those people scare me way more. The climate extremists scare me way more than any person just looking for some money. Because if you're going to go wrench attack someone, it's way, way, easier and a better situation. Just go wrench attack like a gas station because that person doesn't care. It's not their money. Like, right? To come rob me is
who's going to defend yourself,
right? Somebody who's going to defend themselves. Somebody who's prepared to defend themselves.
Right. Go to the grocery store. Like,
but I think this, because there's a lot of money to be lost. Like I said, it's an over $1 trillion a year industry globally.
What is
the carbon sequestration green energy game? Right? The amount of seriously
trillion?
Over a trillion. Absolutely. I mean, literally, I'm talking about like tens of billions of dollars have been ill-gotten.
What's a few trillion among friends anymore?
Friends? So that's the real fight, right? That's the basis of the fight against proof of work is, 1 unit of energy production / consumption equals 1 unit of negative environmental impact equals 1 unit of harming humanity via the weather and the poor, and so on and so forth. And that is the argument. That is the fight of the decade. And it's going to come, I think, via OFAC compliant blocks, right? Like that's where if we find ourselves in a place where, and I'm horrified to see, quote unquote Bitcoiners, if you will come out. I mean, I posted this on Twitter the other day. Like I'm waiting for somebody to come out and be like, OFAC compliant blocks are good for adoption. Here's why, right? And they're going to start a Twitter thread. And that's a means of capturing the network, right? It's a means of.
Is that Foundry? That's like the large Foundry and Mara pool.
I don't know who the bigger Foundry's a really big pool right now.
Yeah, the largest.
What I would hope is that they would flee. I would hope they would go to a different jurisdiction. The problem is
you can move the ASICs, but you can't move your energy source, right?
Right. The good news is like there's plenty of energy all over this planet, plenty of waste energy.
You said
right. I mean, it's energy.
There's lots of energy.
There's no shortage there.
Problem is consuming it.
Some jurisdictions, obviously are more friendly in terms of like, property rights and things like that. The United States is great for property rights. But, the way I see it, the way it looks to me is, the regulators come in and they say, hey, you have to, if you're a mining pool or a miner in the United States, you have to mine OFAC compliant blocks or whatever.
Oh, they're going to do that.
Well, they're going to push back, right? And because you can push back in the US, they're going to at least make it sweet for themselves. They're at least going to make it juicy to where they say, well, hey, listen, if you make us mine OFAC compliant blocks, we're going to be sacrificing transaction fees. You're hurting our business model. You need to therefore subsidize
pay
us. Yeah, either pay us or we get some type of preferential blah, 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 right? And then that starts this whirlwind of all the actors of this, of whatever organization that is. They now have an incentive to go out and try to argue in favor of like OFAC compliant blocks. And they literally have to either decide, hey, do we, move to a new jurisdiction, incur insane amounts of costs, maybe even shut our business down or whatever, or do we comply with the government and go forward? And so that's how I see the green energy, this climate alarmism really attack Bitcoin.
Dude, that seems like a threat. That seems
it's
like
a serious threat.
Do you think that like Bitcoin energy, like people who are miners and energy producers, do you think that they've considered this? Like, is there a solution to that? Like, what do we do?
I mean, I think the solution to that is competition, right? Is if the network has enough competition, it'll be way
miner in every home.
Well, right, and there's tools to. One of the things is paying high fees, right? Like, I mean, if I'm not an OFAC compliant address or whatever, like I'm gonna yank my fee up and make sure that the miners that are not mining OFAC compliance are getting rewarded for it, right? I'm gonna reward them for,
and the opportunity cost of the ones who are complying
will grow, and guess what? It'll grow every 4 years because transaction fees become a greater part of the block subsidy. So OFAC compliance becomes more painful every halving, right? And so that's where
I didn't think of that.
The network is very rigid, right? It's very defensive. Satoshi Nakamoto
genius thought of this, dude.
I don't know how. I mean,
said I'm going to create this and then disappear and not extract any value.
It's really
it makes
really
no
remarkable.
sense to me, dude. It's the CIA. It's the only way. It's the only way, dude. Nobody else could be that.
But they're never altruistic.
That's what I know, but
right?
Like,
and this is the most altruistic.
Maybe they're not
ever.
Maybe they're not altruistic.
I mean, I
maybe this is all part of their plan.
Maybe it is, right? I don't need to plant the seeds and find those who are dissident.
Get to do the dirty work for them.
We'll find the people that are naturally opposed to state money and such, is release this kind of a thing, and then they'll show themselves, right? I mean, that's the one thing about Bitcoin I've mentioned is
the scarlet letter.
Exactly. A lot of the people in Bitcoin are people that typically don't go out of their way to go socialize. They keep to themselves.
That's why I love my Bitcoiner friends, bro.
Well, until Bitcoin though. Bitcoin actually gave them a reason to like come and like socialize with people, like strangers, socialize with strangers, right? And become part of something bigger than themselves. Typically that was not something that, like, I never saw myself ever being, not anonymous on the internet. The only time I said I was gonna not be an anon is if I worked with Upstream Data, right? I wanted to, because like oil and gas producers aren't going to talk to Denverbitcoin, right? They're like I have to be I can't. They won't take my phone call.
What an iconic name, dude. Denverbitcoin, bro. You snagged that boy early.
I don't know. I just can't. The thing was, it wasn't even about having a cool name. I just knew I was going to talk about Denver and I was going to talk about Bitcoin. Right?
You grew up here, right?
Yeah, I was born and raised here. So, like, Twitter's really cool for localism, right? Because it's one of those things where you can be like, I can be scrolling through Twitter and I can see that somebody's at a concert at Fiddler's Green or whatever, and like, you know what I mean? And I think Twitter it's kind of like terrestrial radio in that way, where you can broadcast to like these small subgroups and in real time, right? It's like kind of outsourced journalism in a way, and know what's going on in real time. And so I came to Twitter to learn about Bitcoin. I would never have been on Twitter otherwise.
Same. I never had the Twitter until Bitcoin.
And I saw that when you search in the Twitter search bar, if the word that you search for is in somebody's handle, like their tweets will pop up even if that word wasn't in the tweet. And so that's why I was like, I'll put Denver and Bitcoin in there, because those are right. Yeah. Then and people will find me, right? And I'll find. So that was my logic. I wasn't about having a cool name or anything. Like I just thought it was practical. Yeah, but then it became like my name for a couple of years, where people only called me Denver. Because they didn't know my name.
I know.
Right? I mean,
people, you're like, yo, Denver. And I'm like, bro, I can't call you Denver.
I know.
I live in Denver. I can't call you Denver. And I can't call you Bitcoin.
So what's your name?
Dude, all my friends in Colorado here are like at either like in finance or economics and understand Bitcoin, but just still are trapped there because the money's too good. Or like are in the Bitcoin industry, or it's like it's just a different type of. I find that I seek out people who share the same enthusiasm for how Bitcoin can affect humanity, I think it's like a certain type of worldview that you probably like have. You definitely like probably are skeptical of control and power. That's what the decentralization aspect is so appealing. But also like hopeful, I think, like, because if you were really just like miserable about humanity, like Bitcoin doesn't seem like that great because it's like, oh, who cares? Like
Exactly.
everything's going to shit anyway.
Exactly.
Like there's a future that could be brighter than today. So it's like cautiously optimistic people, I guess, would be like a quicker.
Well, I'd say this too. Like, I mean, I'm an entirely different person than I was in 2017, and that's, by the way, that's not really because of Bitcoin. It's because of oil and gas. Right? Honestly, I changed who I was when I got into the petroleum industry and oil and gas because I learned really quickly that this world runs on oil and gas. It runs on petroleum, right? There's hardly a thing in this room. There's probably not a thing in this room that petroleum didn't touch in one way, shape, or form. Seriously, like not a single thing.
Look around.
Yeah, like
everything's plastic or metal or
bingo. Like, I mean, and by the way, how did it get transported?
Oh, right. Oh,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, is anybody? I mean, how do we?
With my mind.
Yeah. Exactly. How do you get anything across an ocean? Period. Right. Whether it's an airplane, and certainly if you're gonna sail it, find me a captain that doesn't want an engine. Right. And so, like, petroleum is the foundation of the world today. It's the foundation of modern living. It's the foundation that propels, humans into flourishing. And I learned that really quickly in the oil and gas industry. And then I learned how Bitcoin, I came to kind of discover how Bitcoin was going to uplift the oil and gas industry, uplift those who are, in my opinion, the most important, the upstream producers, those actually taking the risk to go explore and drill for new oil and gas and try to produce it. I saw how it was going to uplift them, and that's where I got really, excited and hopeful. I would say I think I'm more of a, like, I think oil and gas benefits humanity more than Bitcoin. Like, I do. I think petroleum and hydrocarbons.
Energy. I mean, if you look, like, human longevity and kilowatt hour consumed per person are like
neck and neck,
extremely highly corretated together, right?
It's like, causational. Right?
Yeah,
it's truly causational. Well, I mean, one of the examples I give to people is like, what about open heart surgery? Right? Like, if
requires electricity.
Well, just think about the amount of energy it requires to even have the option of open heart surgery. Like, typically we're talking about like storing an organ. They might have to like fly it from one state to your hospital where you're at. I mean, how many hydrocarbons went into that surgeon's, his experience? The
tools,
right?
The actual
tools, but like beyond the actual infrastructure of the hospital itself, right? How do you get a sanitary environment? Right?
It's like it's can't even
immeasurable.
Yeah.
It's immeasurable, right? And so, but like, are we going to argue that open heart surgery is a bad thing? Like, no, that's an indication of an increase of quality of life. Is that we can literally we can put to purpose an organ, a human organ that otherwise, is not benefiting anybody. We could place it in someone and save their life.
You wouldn't think petroleum plays a role there, but it does.
Everything.
Because transportation is so critical in our global society.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a solar panel or a wind turbine without petroleum, right?
That's my favorite argument.
Well, that's the fun part. Is it's like it's a product of it. So even if you're like claiming some green energy argument that it was solar that did this, like, well, you couldn't have those solar panels. You sure as shit couldn't have shipped them, produced them, mined the minerals, all that stuff. So at the end of the day, I think that it's energy that uplifts humanity. Bitcoin's amazing. I think Bitcoin's great because it's the commodity most tied to energy production and power generation, closest tied, right? Where gold is quite tied to it in terms of it takes a lot of energy and time to find the gold because it's so scarce in the crust of the earth, right? But not like Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a perfect measurable relationship to a kilowatt hour. And that's indicative that it should be, the technology we use to measure social value, right? Measure value created is something that is tethered to energy production.
And that can't be changed over time. So like
right.
The amount of energy has to grow into the same number of units, and the amount of population on Earth has to grow into the same number of units. So it provides a clearer pricing signal because it's not being skewed by the changes in energy production
Exactly.
or the changes in population. You're getting a perfect measurement based on that.
So hold on, let me give you a quick example. So I was on a phone call with a gentleman who he sails. He's like a yacht captain, a big boat captain, right? And so oftentimes even guys that have these really nice, like super yacht guys, they don't drive their own boat, right? They have like a crew because you need like a seven.
drive my
Yeah,
own boat.
you have like a 7-man crew to man this thing. He's a captain, and he gave me this example. So this is not original to my thought. He actually said this to me, and I thought it was profound. He said, Bitcoin is kind of like a navigation tool. He's like, when you're out in the ocean, and any airline pilot would kind of tell you the same thing, is if you get in a position where you don't have like satellite connection technology where you more or less know where you are, what you do is you estimate where you are, and then you point a direction, and you travel that direction for a certain amount of time. And then you say, okay, we were here. We went this direction at this pace for this long. We should be here, right? Like that's how you navigate the open ocean. Bitcoin is much like that in the sense that, in an economic sense, where with fiat money, because it's moving all over the place, like nobody even knows what the current supply of dollars is. They have estimations again, but nobody has any fucking clue what the exact amount of dollars in circulation is. Nobody knows. It's really hard to navigate, right? Because even if you've got a heading and you point that way, you go to measure it, and that's part of what I think people feel is with inflation and all this crazy monetary shit is nobody knows whether they're rich or they're poor. Like go ask people how much they need to retire. How much money do you need to retire? And you'll probably get an answer from like, $500,000 to $1 million up to like 50 million. Like it'll be a massive span of what people think they need to retire. I think if you asked people in 1720 the same question, it would vary, but it wouldn't vary the way it would vary today. And it's because we're all fucking lost, right? We have no idea. Like, I mean, what should a microphone cost? Why are certain things just stupid expensive? How is
They cost too much.
How is it that milk has doubled in like a year?
Dude,
So Bitcoin will, the more useful that technology, that tool we use to measure value is, the more value we'll be able to create, because we'll be able, to navigate where we are. You'll know if you're more or less efficient than somebody else. You'll know if you're, something is priced properly or improperly. Markets will become more efficient. The compounding benefits of that are immeasurable, right? Like, look at it on a 10-year span. What does that do to humanity and flourishing? Oh God, Lord only knows. But man, we're lost today, right? And it seems to only be getting a little crazier.
You take the real estate market. I think it's such an obvious example. That's to me is when I started being like, wait, a house is $1 million now.
Yeah, well, like the term monetary premium.
Like, what's $1 million even?
Yeah. Well,
what's $1 million?
A house isn't $1 million. Like condos are $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, monetary
land is $1 million. Like,
why are there 50 freaking frozen yogurt shops in the same square mile? Right. The guy that owns those frozen yogurt shops doesn't even want to own them. Okay. He just wants to put his money somewhere where it won't go to shit. Right? He wants to earn a little bit of a return. Same thing with real estate, right? It's a place to park money.
Well, that's the thing. If you buy the real estate, you buy the building, who cares what you run? Because you're going to, on the appreciation of the property alone, you'll break even.
And that's because cash sucks as a, storing value through time. Cash is awful. So you have this massive monetary premium where, again, Bitcoin ought to suck in a lot of that monetary premium, right? For those who begin to understand it, it's a savings account. It's the way to store value through time. To use Bitcoin for transactions and things like that, I think that's like this weird bonus that because it's digital, because it's natively digital, Bitcoin can be great for transacting, for the medium. But where it changes the world, in my opinion, is not through immutable, means of transacting value, because people can always trade immutably for the most part, right? Like you could always barter, right? Where it may not be.
Yeah, but you've got the double coincidence of once that makes it. Really shitty to barter.
No, the double coincidence. I mean, that's where it gets and
that's why people money developed.
Exactly. That's exactly why this technology exists.
Well, this I think this leads in perfect to Rob's question from last episode. So Rob was asking, you quote Bitcoin ROI, mining ROIs. You think about Bitcoin as this unit of account. And typically that's like the final stage. Normally people use something as a medium of exchange before a unit of account. So his question to you was like, how do you get there? Like, how do you go from, even for Bitcoiners, like you're thinking in fiat, like how do you get to that unit of account? Like you had just mentioned that's really the indivisible point, that's like the most critical feature. The medium of exchange, maybe not so much. So like, how do you get to that unit of account part?
I mean, I think the way you get there is by, at least for me, the way I got there was by losing all faith in the other units of account, right? But then why did I lose faith in them, right? Because they're not independently even, auditable. They're hardly measurable, right? Like I think that you can't, like I said, even if I spent a ton of money and a ton of time and went and talked to everybody, say I had access to every human on earth to talk to them if I wanted to, I don't think I could figure out, even within that close of a precision, how many dollars are in circulation.
And
right?
That depends on which measurement of dollars you're even looking at.
It depends on
a dozen different ways you could skin it.
And by the time, I might ask somebody the question, by the time they answer it, it might have changed, right? So that's the other thing. And so, that's a really cool thing with Bitcoin is, check this out, and I ran the numbers on this, where if you want to try to predict Bitcoin's future supply, what do? Right? You take more or less the production rate, which is, right now it's 6.25 Bitcoin per block, 144 blocks per day, right? You take that and you multiply it out and you say, okay, well, when will Bitcoin hit its millionth? When will the millionth Bitcoin be released? You throw out a date, an estimated date. Or in other words, you could say on this date, 5 years in the future, how many more Bitcoin are going to be in circulation? Well, if you did that back in 2010, and you tried to guess, hey, when will the 750,000th Bitcoin be mined? You would have guessed like 6 months from when it actually happened, right? You'd be guessing 6 months and further ahead, right? So it's like it would have happened. I think it happened. Like
is that accurate? Or
I ran these numbers, yeah. So it was like it happened in, what was it, like April or something of this year. If you would have ran the numbers just from that moment, it would have been showing you like January of 2023 is when it should be. Well, and why is that? Well, that's because the block time hasn't been perfectly 10 minutes because hash rate grows.
And because it's been under 10 minutes because hash rate's growing fast.
Right. But you look at the percentages of this and it's like, okay, well, how much more Bitcoin will be in circulation on the date that you guessed than 750,000? And it's like 1%,
so
half of a percent.
The variation is very small.
So you can accurately predict what it's going to be 12 years into the future.
Right. That's crazy.
And by the way, that's only going to become more precise because there will be less, in my opinion, there will be less fluctuation in
the flattening of
hash rate. Right? It's really hard for hash rate to double right now. Right? It's like really hard. Apparently, it's
tell Marathon and Coors that, bro. They seem to be hell bent on increasing it.
Well, that's the power game, right? Like, and that's because ASICs. These are the ASICs of the future. I don't think we might get below 20 watt per terahash in the next 5 years. With firmware, we'll find ways to teeter down there. But it's not going to get much more efficient, right? What's then predictable is the amount of power you need. And right now it's about 30, megawatts per exahash.
What do you think, our great grandkids, like what kind of machines will they be using? Like in 2050, what kind of efficiency measurements? I mean, obviously,
I don't think. I'll say this: I don't think it'll be below 10 watt per terahash. I don't think
in 2050.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, we're talking about like.
We bet on it.
Oh, did you guys bet on it?
No, I'm saying we bet on it.
We got. I guess we got evidence of it now. Yeah,
we got to create a DLC.
Exactly. I don't think it will because. Again, it's really hard, okay, and that's barring that there's not some.
I believe it. No, I believe
unforeseen innovation in computational.
Because going from 20
work.
to 10 is like going from 40 to 20, and going from 10 to 5 is like right.
Right. Well, it's even harder, right? It's like
because you're pushing up against like physics.
You're trying to squeeze out and that's from what I understand. So I talked to a guy. He had actually reached out to me. He's worked for 10 years on Apple's. Manufacturing chip production, right? He was like, and Apple really only started manufacturing chips recently. Yeah, they're the M1 and such. But they dealt with chips obviously a lot. And I asked him, I was like, can you explain this to me? Like, reassure me, in other words. Tell me why, it's not going to get much better than this, like why, we're getting there. And what he explained to me was that, we're currently printing at 5 nanometer. When you get down below even 5 nanometer, because it's such a small amount of space, right? Like there's almost no distance, but 3 nanometers of distance is almost no distance at all.
It just requires like too precise of manufacturing? Or?
Well, apparently it becomes difficult to predict the direction of an electron, right? Because
we're getting into quantum physics now.
Kind of. Well, yeah, but like you're in such a small space that a circuit is just electrons,
right,
moving, right?
You're you're competing against the size of electrons now.
Well, and you don't know which way they'll go, right? They tend to like jump. They tend to like maybe because it's such a small amount of space. It's if something moves 3 nanometers, did it really move? Like, okay, what if it only moves half a nanometer? Like, at what point is it almost not even electron travel? It's traveling the width of the electron. And so that's part of, this is physical law. So, and that's, there's a sweet meme out there, right? Talking about what it means to try to brute force something that's encrypted 2 to the 256th power. And that's why they say until, computers are made out of something other than matter and occupy something other than space, right? So if computers are made of something other than then I think less than 10 watt per terahash is really tough. But if I'm wrong, like I think there's huge benefits to humanity in terms of processing efficiency and things like that. That's why quantum computing is such its own. It's total FUD. It's such its own little sect. And
the real fork that I'm more focused on is the integer overflow in 2038, 2039.
Oh yeah, what is
the
that?
Unix time expires and goes back to 0. Like that is like much more real and pressing and immediate than quantum computing breaking
I think I agree. Because
but it's an easy hard fork, or just fix it.
Right. Well, and even if you get down, that's the thing we talked about earlier is, okay, so say the kids in 2050, say they do get down to 5 watt per terahash, right? So that means that they're 70% more efficient or something than today, right? Well,
which it's exponential.
I know producers in the oil field that I guarantee you that their energy is 70% cheaper than yours. You know what I mean?
It's an OpEx battle.
Is it some type of competitive advantage that like breaks the system? Not at all, right?
So the sustainable advantages in energy creation.
Oh, and
or harvesting
and another piece too. So I'll touch on this is that gentleman at Apple who I spoke with. He also told me, he's like, the cool thing was that when the Silicon Revolution was happening, what was so cool is that they designed a chip for 40 nanometer, right? They have a chip, design. And then when they figured out the ability to print at like 20 nanometer, what was cool is you could just take the 40 nanometer chip design, you could just like copy and paste it over and print it on a 20 nanometer chip, and boom, it was like way more efficient, right? But down at the 5 and 7, you have to redesign the entire thing. So
can't do that.
So the cost to produce it, right? The actual input costs are increasing at the same time that the efficiency benefit is decreasing. It doesn't even make sense to try to make a 3 nanometer because who's going to buy the ASIC? You're going to have to price it at like $100,000 and it's only 10% more efficient. Like fuck that, I'll just run S19s. So that's kind of where I just don't.
It's shifting from a efficiency battle of hash rate to an efficiency of production.
Yeah, marginal efficiency of energy. Yeah, right. Energy and power production, right? But that's what's cool too is, okay, well then how much have we squeezed out of power generation, right? And by the way, the efficiency game of generating power, like how much power can you generate from a single cubic foot of natural gas or whatever? That's already been squeezed. There was already plenty of incentives to be as efficient as possible, but now there's even more, right? Where can we develop a new type of turbine or a new this, right? A new type of engine that crushes those, with 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. This thing is a 100 kilowatt engine. This thing's only a 50 kilowatt engine, right? Like it's going to incentivize humans to go out there and make sure that we have really squeezed out all of that marginal benefit, all of that potential innovation left, and everyone will benefit from it. Right? Everyone wins.
Your boy Rob said we're dung beetles, squeezing out every last little piece.
I mean, we definitely.
I think that's what I'm gonna call the last episode. Bitcoin miners are dung beetles.
Oh yeah,
with Rob.
With Rob. No, I think that's why the oil and gas industry I love it so much. Is it's the other outside of Bitcoin mining, oil and gas is one of those things that's really hard to cheat. Right now, this green energy subsidization with saving the planet and carbon dioxide has been one hell of a means by which to rig an energy production game in your favor, right? Where you can be much less efficient and maybe more profitable because of this.
Because you're playing
because you're virtuous, right? Because you're saving the planet or whatever, right? And so then you get you get the taxpayer dollars. You get covered, and so
really you're benefiting from the fiat.
Right.
Can't tell you an effect.
Well, and there's going to be those guys. There's going to be that in mining Bitcoin too. I mean, think about somebody that's subsidized to mine Bitcoin. I know some.
Like Riot. Riot got paid more dollars to turn off than they would have mined in Bitcoin in July or something.
Well, I think that wasn't a function of saving the planet. That was a function of market, right? Where
smart contract structuring on their part.
Well, yeah, that was where they're in a good position where these people are now demanding more than what the network is going to pay us. Shut them off and send the electricity to them. That's optionality, right? I see that in the oil and gas space of even if you've got a pipeline, I think a Bitcoin mine makes sense. Because what happens when there's an issue with the pipeline? Regulators come in and shut down that pipeline. What happens when the prices on that pipeline go to shit? And maybe a big
counterparty risk, right?
Well, last year pipeline prices were $5 an MCF, right? $5 per 1,000 cubic feet. Guys were making 35 mining Bitcoin, right? That's some optionality there, right? So it's like getting 7x per same unit of gas. Now, what's fun is that these markets have kind of met an equilibrium, and today it's about $5-6 for MCF of gas, about the same. It's which by the way is historically high, and new gen ASICs in the oil field are like $6 to $10 per MCF, and so like they've kind of met this, right? And they should, right? I mean, anytime that the pipeline's so much worse, like shut your gas off the pipeline, push it over to a generator, and mine.
So there's that natural balancing and that's Bitcoin mining, right? It's like if you have a unfair competitive advantage, not for long.
Well, yeah,
like it's the great equalizer,
right? That's the network having surplus demand, right? The network is demanding power, demanding energy more than humans are, or at least it's willing to pay so much more, right?
Well, dude. So I mean, as we wrap up here, like one thing that I really wanted to ask you was about the you called it it was the Denver derivative. I don't know what it's called now, but
it's a Denver derivative.
All right. But you're not Denver anymore. So
yeah, but that's what I got to name it, so I named it the Denver derivative.
So can you explain like what this Denver derivative is and how you use it to, forecast or predict?
Yeah, I mean, I don't lean on the Denver derivative with any, huge like credence, I guess, right? But it was just an equation. It was a formula I came up with to try to track at any given moment, like, hey, am I getting a good deal for an ASIC? Because here's the problem, is ASICs are effectively priced based on Bitcoin's market price, right? And many people would just be like, okay, well, that makes sense, right? It's like if Bitcoin goes up, then, the value of the ASIC would go up because, the dollar value would. The issue is that it's only half the equation, right? And so really what the ASIC hardware market should be priced based upon the hash price. And the hash price is the value of a single terahash over the course of a day, right? And so currently a single terahash is worth about 7 cents over the course of a 24-hour period. So 100 terahash S19 makes about $7 a day, right? Because 100 terahash is 100 times 7 cents. And so, but that's not the case. It's based on like distributors and those selling ASICs and even those buying ASICs, they pretty much exclusively look at Bitcoin's market price. But, for example, today, like we had a 13 or 12% Bitcoin adjustment, right? Well, the price stayed the same. It's 19,000. But then competition went up 10%. Well, that ASIC now makes 10% less dollars, right? So its price should shift, but it didn't, right? Because Bitcoin is still 19,000. And the opposite is true too, where sometimes Bitcoin will double, but competition maybe went up 25%. So really it was only a net 25% gain to, the actual marginal benefit of this ASIC, but the price of it will double, right? So like, how do I track this over time? Because I've got to try to figure out how profitable was the ASIC at this time? What was it priced at? What should it have been priced at? So on and so forth. So then I came up with this means of kind of boiling it down to a single number where relative to history, if it's, and lower the number, the better, right? Relative to history, how well priced is this ASIC? And, and by the way, this is specifically speaking toward priced in dollars, because the market is priced in dollars. Like hardware is priced in dollars. Hardly anybody prices their ASICs in Bitcoin because they're afraid that they're going to price it in Bitcoin and Bitcoin's going to drop 10% the next day. And it's going to, because their margins are really, the world still runs on dollars. It all still runs on dollars. And so I base this on dollars. I have one that I'm not sure I'm going to ever publish it. I might, but I have one that's based more on Bitcoin as the denominator. And
of course you do.
Yeah, because that's the way I more think about it. And that's what's interesting is, last year I bought a couple of ASICs when Bitcoin was like 55 grand, right? And I paid like 14 million sat, 0.14 Bitcoin, right? Which is $7,000, right? So I paid like 7,500 for these ASICs. Well, today, guys are like jumping up and down at the idea that an ASIC is, $3,000. That's 15 million sats, right? It actually costs more Bitcoin today,
right,
than it did back when I bought mine at $55,000 Bitcoin.
Plus you had a year more of mining and the difficulty was lower.
And the adjustments coming up closer. But then you look at the hash value, not the hash price, the hash value. How many sats is 1 terahash worth over a day? That always is going down.
Constant race against
And
time.
when I did it, it was at like 550, 600 sat was the hash value. Today it's like 400. It's down like 30%.
So is it like, or is this a bad time to buy Bitcoin miners then? Like,
Well, see, if you're borrowing, or if your life is denominated in dollars and your business is denominated in dollars, it looks like a beautiful time to buy Bitcoin miners, right? Oh my, I'm getting these for $2,000. People were spending 10 grand on them last year, right? But I'm the guy that's like, actually, I'm pretty happy with the ones I bought when I bought them, because one, it's almost like a short sell kind of on Bitcoin, right? I'm buying this hardware, and I've been mining with it the whole time. And what's crazy is I could go take that ASIC. I mean, I could sell it for $1,500. That's almost 10 million sats. It's 7 million sats. Like, so right? So denominated in Bitcoin, it's a whole different game. Denominated in dollars, it's a great time to buy.
That's why, like, I'm so interested in Bitcoin mining, but I don't have any like competitive advantage with like energy production or, and the only thing I could see myself doing is like if using it for heating, right? Because we live in a place where it's cold for months and months out of the year.
Yeah,
and
5 months out of the year.
And I have sunk costs in the form of heating the home. So that to me makes sense. But yeah, I just like, it's so competitive and like we're getting closer to the halving. It's like, I always think about it when I am evaluating Bitcoin mining specifically, I'm directly saying how many quantity of coins am I going to mine versus what I can market buy with a fat finger right now. And it's also just easier to market buy. Market buy, done, in self-custody for forever, and I never have to think about it ever again. I don't have to take taxes. I don't have to worry about like, transaction fees or pool risks or none of this stuff. Yeah. So I always find it very hard to actually like pull the trigger on a miner.
Well, that's good. I mean, like, and I would say like, certainly when Bitcoin's price is lower, it's like right now, it's impossible for me to try to go buy an ASIC because
but people want to right now. Now's they're like, oh, it's a great time to buy.
Again, it's that dollar. So,
we're in a fiat world.
We'll put it this way: spending Bitcoin to go mine, using your Bitcoin to go buy an ASIC to try to mine more Bitcoin.
Well, what's the difference? Because if it's dollars in your account, the opportunity cost is that it could be turned into Bitcoin.
The difference then is debt, right? So that's exactly
if you're going to take someone else's debt.
Bingo. And see, and that's where I was at, right? In 2018, that I kept running this equation of spending my Bitcoin to get ASICs to go mine Bitcoin. And by the way, I was even looking at in the oil field, right? I was like, I had enough Bitcoin to capitalize this project I wanted to do in the oil field, right? Upstream Data built it for me. But the numbers sucked. I hated them. But I was like, nobody's going to loan me money to just go buy Bitcoin.
Right.
But they'll loan me money to solve a stranded energy problem.
Okay. That is
so now
a big key.
My personal exposure to Bitcoin will be greater because there is no opportunity cost on that money, because the only way I can spend that money is this business venture where I will likely get $1 return. And we crushed our dollar return. But like as a company, should we have just bought Bitcoin instead of gone and mined? That took us like 3 years.
Yes, but you wouldn't have even been able to get access to that capital to just market buy in the first place.
Well, and by the way, we did beat that number. I mean, I had that number in my mind, of course. I was like, if we just YOLO this into Bitcoin, we could have this much. But Bitcoin was like, $6,500 or so when I was doing this. It took us 3 years to finally surpass that number, right? We surpassed the amount of dollars within like a year. It was like a joke. But Bitcoin, it's really hard to beat. At the end of the day, it's very, very hard to beat the returns of just buying and holding Bitcoin. It's really hard.
Remember that.
Yeah, seriously, people
just buy and hodl. You don't have to get in all this.
Really hard to beat the returns of that.
Buy and hold.
Especially when, the further you zoom out, right? I mean, like you could look at just the last 1 year, really easy to beat a negative 67%. But
that's how I justified the microphones. I was like, yo, these will not have the downside capture of Bitcoin in a bear market. Yeah. They won't have the upside capture of Bitcoin in a bull market, but they'll probably hold their value better than fiat. And we can do cool shit like record podcasts on them in the meantime.
And I'm the person that like, when Bitcoin's absolutely ripping, like if there's something where I want to spend Bitcoin, the time to do it is when it's absolutely ripping.
Dude, the next cycle, like, I'm literally like, I'm going to take some coin and enjoy my life. And like,
just mitigate your downside.
I'm going to slow my DCA down when we get to the like, the high, there's some certain technical indicators that like are toppy from a sentiment standpoint, like days above, next time I'm going to, because I like, when we were at like 69K, I was like, what else can I sell to buy more Bitcoin? And now I'm like, shh.
Yeah. See, of course,
next time I'm doing the opposite.
I get that bullish too, but that's
what I'm doing now.
I've been that way for just, no matter what Bitcoin's price was, I've been that way for a long time. And so then it was at 55 and I kept just measuring things in terms of Bitcoin. I was like, wow, like this is the same ASIC, it's like, honestly, I was at a point where less than 15 million sats. I was like, I think I'm going to pull a trigger if I can get this many terahash for this, for less than 15 million sats. And, that was like in hindsight, I think I'm in good shape. Right. Plus I love the knowledge base and the experience from actually running ASICs every day and like tinkering with them. It's applicable to what I, do for work and everything else. And so, there's a lot of
there's like tangential stuff.
Yeah, immeasurable value, but there,
Same thing. I'm like, I'm building like skills, like learning about like audio production, video production, like with the podcast and stuff. And like, that may translate into my job at Casa at some point in the future. Like we do Twitter Spaces now with, with some of the like the C-level people. So.
Right. Well, like, regardless, like you have a skill set, right?
It's like you can like that's talk about not having a custodial risk or like like nobody can take your skills that you've developed away from you.
No, that's what that
is the most sovereign of all.
Right. Like don't ever stop learning, right? Try to stay humble always. Because as you become more intelligent, I think people become less patient with tyrannical and unproductive behavior, right? It's easier to just like say like fuck you to the people that aren't trying to make the world a better place or whatever. And certainly the intelligence, I think there's a factor there. But if you can stay humble and increase your own intelligence, increase your skill set,
and stack sat,
like that's your own value. I mean, like trust me, your intelligence will help you stack a lot more sats, right? You'll start seeing opportunity in places, right?
Well, dude, human labor is going to become less and less valuable as machines are better at it. So like human capital in the form of like your intelligence, your knowledge, soft skills like business production planning, strategic planning.
I mean, relationships. Relationships is huge too.
That's it. Your network's your net worth. Everybody that watches Value Stack is a friend of mine.
Exactly. Right.
I think friends are there to support you when nobody else will.
Well, right. And really it's a matter of, having credibility. That's what's so cool about the information age. And that's what I think is, I think that's what's detrimental to like governments and things is in a world where everyone's going to start to know each other, because the world's really not that big, right? There's really not that many people in Colorado, right? It's not beyond what is kind of trackable through social circles and things. If you're out there doing bad things and harming people, people are going to figure it out, right? Like it would have been so easy to be a criminal, like back in the 1700s. Like you could just like rob a whole town and like just show up at another town and like, be a con man. It would be so easy, right? But in this day and age, reputation is starting to become part of currency. And that's where proof of work comes in, right? It's like you got to prove to the world that you're actually out here and you want to spend your time and energy like creating value. And people take notice of that.
There's going to be just when you said that, I think of like central bank digital currencies, and it's like literally a part of their social credit score is reputation, and like, did you go visit your parents, or like, did you take care of the elderly?
What a joke.
But like in that regard, like it is still reputation in the same way, and it touching currency, but in more of an enforcement than a opt-in.
Well, the problem is that there's a single entity measuring it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like it's from a top down instead of like an opt-in by choice bottom up approach, which is is the most important difference.
Right. Yeah.
Because it completely restructures the power dynamic.
Exactly. And I think top down reputation is people, at the end of the day, I don't think people are actually, very stupid. Like people are relatively down to earth. Like they know when something smells like bullshit, like you can lie to them. I'm like Epstein didn't kill himself kind of a thing. Like,
right.
Like
I'm not, no comment.
You know what I mean though? But like, I mean, everyone in the world's like, yeah, that's, so the cameras just happen to be off. The security guards just happen to be asleep. Like everyone's like, the likelihood that, is just so low. Right. So it's people can see through a lot of that BS. And so I think that top down approach fails just because they're, they try to tell you what you should believe rather than, who are you going to believe? Like me or your own lying eyes is really what they say, right? It's
when you put it like that,
like, it's ridiculous. So, but
well, last question for you, brother. Actually, it's not even a question. Well, it's a question for Tyler, our next guest, T.Bain.
Yeah.
Founder of Denverbitcoin and beer.
Mm-hmm.
He's a grid guy.
He's an amazing guy.
Amazing guy. We're meeting next Saturday, right before a Halloween party that we're gonna have. So, you were invited, of course.
Oh yeah.
Man. Next Saturday.
I could be down for that.
This whole place is gonna be orange, and there'll be some ghosts and stuff. But,
hell yeah.
But yeah. So what should we ask Tyler? He's a grid guy. I had Rob on to talk about kind of like ASICs and really like machines because he does his other project, Distributash. And then you've really brought a lot of light into the oil and gas side, as well as Charlie before him. But now Tyler's going to come and fill in some stuff more about the grid and like electricity. And I think it's a perfect segue. So anyway, I'll shut up. What's your question for Tyler so that I can sound smart?
I mean, I don't know if I have like a specific.
You said you had tons of questions earlier.
No, I mean, but what I would want him to talk about on here, I think what I think would be cool to get him to share about is his experience going out to what is it, Adams County, because he went out there and he gave testimony about, the regulation happening around Bitcoin mining in the oil field and Bitcoin mining anywhere.
And he doesn't work in the Bitcoin industry, unlike
all of us. He doesn't. No, and not to mention, he went to I think he went to the School of Mines, which just
back, yeah.
It's another level of intellect. Yeah, it was another level of intellect too. Like that's not a school you can just go half-ass and get through.
He's an incredible smart guy.
Yeah, he is. He's really intelligent. So I'd like to have him talk about, that experience of going out there, and maybe even share a little bit of what he shared. Like I think he had it like a written thing. Like maybe he could share that on the podcast because I think his testimony is damning. Put it that way. Like. If I was the county commissioner sitting there, like they must have felt like fools for the entirety of his speech.
They said, they were like, we don't know. That's why we're doing it.
They only go to the we don't know when they look wrong.
When they're back
right when they look like, they always behave like they know. When they behave wrongfully, they act like they don't. And he proved to them that they obviously didn't know. And so I think to have him share that would be pretty cool because I don't know how much that really got shared around.
Yeah. Rob talked a little. That's where he had the dung beetle quote. So
it's true.
That Adams County hearing commission is going to be a lot more.
I testified there as well. Yeah.
We didn't get to talk about it on this episode.
No, that's
but we're almost at 2 hours. So, well, if you skip the 15 minutes that we recorded,
that we didn't record,
we recorded before. When we were laughing in the beginning, it's because we were just like, oh.
Yeah, we didn't hit the record button.
Yeah. So anyway, man, where can I know where to find you, but just in case our listeners can't, where can they find out more about you, your projects you're involved in?
Yeah. Check out upstreamdata.ca. Check out Upstream Data as a company. We're doing awesome stuff. I'm Denverbitcoin on Twitter. You can usually find me promoting and talking about whatever I'm doing there. And then I'd say, if you have any preconceived notions about oil and gas production, I'd say try to set them to the side and go, do a deep dive down a rabbit hole. Try to call somebody if you know anybody in the industry, and ask them about what they do. And then I'd say I'd challenge everybody to, try to live for one day without touching petroleum products, and then reflect on how much you might value petroleum products. Right? I think there's people have taken petroleum for way too much granted. I mean, it's terrible. Like it's an amazing thing that we should celebrate. Nobody celebrates it. Nobody like other than
Alex
me.
Epstein
It's
does.
me. Yeah, me and Alex Epstein are out there. He's good. He's good shit. He takes a lot.
He takes a lot of.
You want
hits,
to talk about people?
Oh, the Nate Hawaii guy. And we're supposed to do like a debate on McCormick's podcast. Missed opportunity. I could have got him on.
Yeah, exactly. What the hell?
Well, I think like 100 people watch Value Stack instead of his 10,000, but 101 after you subscribe.
That's right.
So don't forget, you can't turn that face down. You can't turn that face down.
You just can't.
So, man, it's been great. We were at for 2 hours. So
thanks for having me, man.